The animation tools in Sensei Format have gotten a huge overhaul. What I've done is actually hard-coded custom animation controls into the graph editor, dope sheet, and NLA editor. So if I split this 3D view here real quick and I open up a timeline window here, we can kind of see the differences. So this little button here will play the animation forward, and that little button will play it backwards. But I felt like there was just too much going on here, and these buttons were too small. So I went ahead and I made the play button larger. Just expanding that a little bit brings the ease of access up to where it's not as cumbersome to actually play and test your animation. I've also included a frames per second mover there. So if we were to tap F to insert a keyframe and then hit G to grab this cube, put it over there, tap F again, and then I use this back button to go to the beginning of the animation and I hit play, we'll see that the animation is moving at 30 frames per second. So I could increase this or decrease this, like say to 60 frames, and hit play, and you'll see it goes much faster. I could hit D and duplicate these, tap A and hit D to duplicate them again, tap A and D to duplicate them one more time. We can actually play this animation and increase and decrease the FPS as we're watching the animation as the animation is going on. So this is an excellent tool for gauging things and kind of slowing and speeding our animation up, as well as just setting the general frame rate for whatever we want without having to fish through the render menu over here. I have unified the color schemes of your three main animation controls of the graph editor is now consistent with the dope sheet and the NLA editor as well. So if I were to put this back on the dope sheet, tap F to insert a keyframe, I'll just rotate that around, hit F again, S to scale, F again, and I've created three quick little keyframes here, moving my timeline with the right mouse button. But as we switch between the graph editor, we see we have consistent color scheme here. So basically, items that belong in similar categories, I have made their color scheme more consistent. Click back on the dope sheet here. If we go over to shape keys, and I could hit this plus sign and then hit it one more time, and then I'll hit tab to go into edit mode of this cube, maybe hit S to scale, middle mouse to constrain, and just scale it out horizontally like that, then hit tab to go back into object mode. So here you see we've created a shape key which you can animate. So I've now went ahead and unified all of the keyable properties as well. So there's properties like this value and other things that you can animate in Blender. And so I went ahead and changed their colors to look more consistent with the color of keyframes. So say I were to tap I over this value. So now we have a keyframe inserted for this value. So it's basically the same color as our regular keyframes. And this is just overall more consistent. Say we bring that value all the way up and tap I again, and so we have that animated. So now anything we know is animated is the same color as the keyframes. So now for two really huge improvements I've made to the animation system that I'm really excited about. The first is After Effects styled keyframing in Blender. So basically, if I were to tap F to insert a keyframe for this cube, you'll see now that I have the object here pop up, and we have this one single line for animation control. So I could rotate this around or scale it or something, and then hit F or just I if I wanted to insert a keyframe and not move the timeline. And by the way, now you can insert keyframes either while in the dope sheet or while in the 3D view. You can use the hotkeys of I or F. So I could tap I here, and that would of course just insert a keyframe and not move the timeline. But let's see, I'll change this up a little bit, scale it, and then hit I again. And as you can see, I can hit the hotkeys either in the 3D view or the dope sheet, and it works. We've created this little animation for this cube. So if I were to double right click over in the 3D view or tap Shift A and add something else like a monkey, I'll tap W a few times and S to scale. to give it some smoothing and make it bigger. And I could then hit F to insert a keyframe for it. And now you see we have a second line of the single animation channel for each object that we can work on. And this is awesome. We can have as many objects in our scene as we want and be able to visibly see how their animation keyframes are relevant to each other. So I could maybe I'll rotate this Suzanne head around like this and tap F again, and then maybe I'll just hit G to grab it over here, and R to rotate, and Z to constrain it to the axis there, and then hit I to insert a keyframe right there. So we could of course have as many objects here, and we can hit play, and say we wanted to slow this down a lot just to get a better idea of what's going on. We can hit play like that and watch this going on, and then maybe, you know, right around here we decide we would actually like to take these Suzanne keyframes and hit G to grab. We actually don't want them to start moving until right around here. Hit the back button, hit play, and so our cube is moving, and then our monkey head starts to move. Blender has this capability by default, but here's what it normally does. If you insert a keyframe, which first of all you have to traverse through a pop-up menu every time you hit I to insert a keyframe, which is annoying. But secondly, whenever you do insert a keyframe in the dope sheet, you will get this. You will get 3 different keyframes to visualize representing stuff. And of course we can expand these and change these values anytime we want, but what I've done is created code that automatically shuts these closed every time a keyframe is inserted to maintain like an After Effects styled animation workflow. So in addition to adding actual animation controls to the dope sheet, graph editor, and NLA editor, I've also set up all the settings to make this work really well. So it's basically animation controls, setting up these settings well to work for this, and then hard coding it into Blender to not display all 3 of these channels every time a new keyframe is inserted. And the end result is a really fast, slick animation pipeline. So if you'll notice down here where it says Loc-Rot Scale, and we click on this, you have these different options, and these options are the type of data that Blender will take in when you create a keyframe for whatever object you're animating. So the most generic of these, which will capture the most type of motion you're looking for, is location, rotation, scale. So that's default set on there in Sensei Format. So basically, if I were to tap F to insert a keyframe, and then hit S to scale, R to rotate, G to grab, and hit F again, Blender is recording all of the pertinent information. However, if you are working with a character, so I'll just click on Projects, Sensei, and Characters, and then select my Sensei character from the animation on the front of my channel and drag it out here into my 3D view. If you're trying to animate a character, then you can use this location, rotation, scale king set here, but what has to be done is you have to select every single bone in your character and create a keyframe for it, or only the movement of one of those bones will be recorded. So for instance, if I were to hit G to grab this control bone here that's going around his waist and bring my character down like this, unless I tapped A and select all of this and then inserted a keyframe, only the movement of this control bone here would be recorded. All the other movements of the other bones would be left out, unless you change this king set here to whole character. But that gets pretty annoying having to do that. So with the new animation tools in Sensei Format, you don't have to do that at all. That's all automatic when you insert a keyframe using either F or I. If I tap Alt-R to reset his rotation, and then I switch this to object mode, if I were to double right click over here and then create a cube, hit S to scale, and then tap F to insert a keyframe for it, R to rotate, S to scale, F insert a keyframe, G to move, just some random animation or whatever, F. So we've animated this cube here. So now we can go straight to our character, select one of his bones, switch this over to pose mode, press F to insert a keyframe for him, and you see when I did that, this automatically switches to whole character. So unless you're doing something really advanced, you now never have to fool with this. Whether you're animating a character or an object, the code I've written is now smart enough to know that and change that for you when inserting a keyframe. When I pressed F, it inserted a keyframe there and moved the timeline down. I could hit G to grab, move him down like this, and then select this control here, G to grab, move his head up, and then maybe just grab his hand a little bit and bring it out there, and grab that hand, maybe grab it and bring it up towards his head for some reason, and then maybe just swing his tail around a bit. So previously I would have had to select all of the bones, then insert a keyframe, and also make sure that was on whole character. Now I just can tap I to insert the keyframe, and it's all done. And so we have one keyframe representing all of the motions that we're making, which is ideal because we don't need a visual representation of every single bone, its keyframe. All we need to know is that it's doing what we want it to do when we want it. And the advantage to this also is I now don't have to worry about selecting all the bones before editing these keyframes either. I can just say hit D to duplicate that keyframe and move it down here, and my character moves exactly to the position of how that keyframe was also. And I can switch that up, change these around, shift select these, scale them together to make the animation faster, or scale them apart to make it slower, hit G to grab to move them. I can then click on my cube at any point and change stuff with it, insert a keyframe for it, and it will switch automatically to the proper keying set. So this is a huge deal in my opinion in terms of simplicity and ease in animating in Blender. So I hope you appreciate that, enjoy that, and if you're not a Sensei Format user and you would like these type of controls, please just check out the front page of my channel on YouTube and we'll get you hooked up.